Okay, let me just get. Okay, great. Nana, thank you for coming. I know obviously you've had to, accommodate us, so we really appreciate your time. I'm Liz. I'm the girl that's been hounding you on email. Thank you for responding to my emails. I appreciate it.
I'm happy to be here, Liz. Thank you for inviting me.
No, my pleasure. And obviously, we've been going in depth in your book. Just wanted to say, as you know, we're anti-racist book club, and we have a lot of white allies in the room. And I just want you to just start to feel comfortable, Nana, because even though there's a sea of white faces, there's some black and brown here as well. And we're all just here to talk more about just like the intersectionality and the lived-in experiences, in this case specifically, of Black women. And just thank you for like adding to this. Yeah, it's been a lot. Thank you for giving a voice to maybe stories that we've been asked, but maybe aren't always told in the public sphere. So thank you. Nana, would you like to just do a 1-2 intro of yourself? We all know who you are, but just to say a few words.
Sure. So what should I say? I usually start by saying I'm an African feminist because it's an important part of my identity, and it also influences all the work that I do. Probably like many of you, a daughter, a sister. I'm a single mom. I have a daughter who's almost 3. I'm super excited about her birthday party next month. I have a dog called Romeo, and I live in Ghana. Yeah, I think that's
back from there. I was there for Christmas for December. I was in the cantonments in Accra. I was at Sandbox. I was everywhere.
Nice.
Yeah, but obviously there's more to Ghana than just Christmas, and New Year. Woo! It was a lot. Beautiful country. I have 101 questions to ask you, but I would like everyone to ask you questions. And I would just like start, because one thing that really struck me about the book was just how you were able to intimately sort of delve in a very sensitive way into essentially people's bedrooms. I just wondered, what skills do you think you employed to be able to elicit that information out so fluidly?
That's a great question. I think I have probably had a lot of practice in asking people intimate questions, because before I wrote the book, I'd been running a blog with my friend called Adventures from the Bedrooms of African Women. And we started that blog by sharing our own very personal, intimate sexual experiences. And what would tend to happen then is, as we, went out in the world and met people at, say, conferences and festivals, they would start to tell me their own experiences. And I would usually say to them, would you like to write about that for the blog? So I think over a period of time, I had just had that practice of speaking to people about sex, And so when it came time to write the book and I was interviewing people, I mean, obviously you kind of need to warm people up, right? You're not going to ask them the really juicy questions at the beginning. You're going to sometimes have a glass of wine and chit chat, and then, wind your way to asking all the questions. But I'd also let people know, obviously, this is a book about sex. It means I'm going to ask you some pretty intimate questions. I would love a lot of detail because I want people to enjoy the book and for people to get a sense of place and texture. If there's a question you don't want to answer, don't feel like you need to answer. You can be anonymous if you want to. And I think people actually like talking about sex, right? Because people don't often have the opportunity to. And so I feel like, yeah. And also a lot of people volunteered. There were some people I met and I thought, oh, I think you have an interesting story to tell. Can I interview you? But I also did call out. So people responded and said, I want you to interview me. And of course, if somebody has said they want to be interviewed, it's because they feel comfortable sharing with you.
Thank you so much for that. I can tell that people have asked that question hundreds of times. I thought I was coming in a different way. Like, you had a PR answer straight.
It's not a PR answer, it's the truth. But I mean, of course, I get asked, a lot of questions all of the time. So yeah.
Definitely. But we hope we're going to ask you really unique ones today. We're going to try. Just one more thing for me before I shut up. It's just that, even when I was 14, I've always been like the resident sexpert when I was in school. I didn't have sex until I was legal, but I was always like just interested in sex. Like, I really wanted to do a sex and relationship course after I trained as a social worker, but my friend in the group told me to calm down. Rose told me to sit down and just become a social worker. So I might still go back to it. But what do you think for you? Why are you interested in sex, man? Why isn't it cooking? Why isn't it something boring? Why sex? As an African woman, are you so interested in it?
Liz, I think because like you, I was also a late bloomer, right? Like, and I
I
feel
was
like
16 and a half when I had sex. I wasn't like young, but yeah.
yeah, but you know, the other thing, I used to say I didn't have sex until like 2 months before I turned 23, until I redefined my understanding of sex, right? Because I used to think of sex purely as what they call now penis and vagina sex between a man and a woman.
It still
So
happens, unfortunately.
yeah, but then when I redefined how I understood sex, I was like, oh, actually, when I was in secondary school, I did have sex. I just did not understand that to be sex. It was just messing around, right? So depending upon how you look at it. But maybe when you are kind of like a late bloomer, you are a bit more interested because you somehow later on think, oh my gosh, you know, am I missing out? What's going on? And then you're really like eager to catch up, which is what I think happened to me. And I also, you know, got married to the very first person I had penis and vagina sex with. And so when that relationship ended, and I have to confess, part of the reason that relationship ended is because I wanted to have sex with more people. And then those days I did not have the language for, can we open up our marriage? I mean, he would have probably killed me if I had suggested it, you know.
Was he a Ghanaian man?
He was a Ghanaian man.
Oh, yeah, they're not about
and
that.
I used to live in the UK at the time.
And he still wasn't open-minded. Hey.
I feel like it was also like a long time ago. I would like to feel like now there's sort of more conversations. I think there's more, not that I think, there's definitely more conversations now about different like relationship structures. And in those days, those conversations were actually not happening, at least in the public domain, or at least in my world. So that's not even something that would have occurred to me, right? But I feel like maybe if I had found myself in that situation in this, you know, present age, I would probably have more language to try and negotiate a different type of relationship structure. But anyway, you know, by the age of 29, I was divorced. I had moved from the UK back to Ghana, and it was like freedom,
Enjoyment.
You know? And part of my process, you know, in trying to figure out what I wanted was to write about sex. And really that's where the interest started from. And once I started, I was just like, oh my gosh, this is so much fun. This is so interesting. I'm never going to run out of things to write about. And yeah, that's why I pretty much write a lot about sex now and have conversations about sex.
No, I appreciate that. You know what's annoying? Because I thought like I did been there, done that. And I read the book and I'm like, I'm still on second base, man. I ain't got enough mileage, man. I still got to put more mileage on this thing. But anyway, that's just my moving forward. God, let me open it out. Who would like to ask Nana a question? Helene, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so just before you come on, Nana, we was talking about some of the kind of like experiences that people shared around sort of negative experiences, you know, being abused and kind of, yeah, that sexual violence that we don't talk about as women. And although obviously that reading's quite heavy, I kind of felt like it was empowering as well, because you balanced it with the healing journeys that women took as well. So, you know, abstaining, becoming celibate, sort of connecting on a spiritual level. And I just really enjoyed kind of reading about those parts. I mean, there's parts of some of the stories that I could relate to. I can't remember if I read it in one of your stories about becoming stigmatized and having an unhealthy, addictive relationship with men. And I'm sure a lot of us can relate to some of the stories.
The best sex is the most toxic one, unfortunately, stigmatized. That needs to be in a mental health DSM-5, like stigmatization.
But yeah, I really enjoyed the book. I really enjoyed the collection of stories, far and wide. And yeah, it was just really nourishing in certain ways, but also nice to feel that healing and just the extraordinariness of it. The one that struck me was the mother that was raising the son who became a pastor, and she was a sex worker with HIV. I was just like, wow, some of the stories were completely mind-blowing. And I guess particularly being from a Caribbean or African background, you know, people coming out or not coming out, some of those struggles we know are much harder when you sort of add the extra layer of religion and expectations. And I guess a part of me felt like, okay, so being raised in England as a British woman kind of made me feel in a way like a little bit lucky. But we know that you know, sexism, misogyny goes on all over the world, but it just painted a different picture of how oppressive it is in certain parts of the world still today. So yeah, it educated me a lot. And I haven't got a question, I'm just ranting now, but I loved the book is all I can say. I really loved and appreciated that.
Thank you so much. That's really good to hear. And there are a number of people who have said to me like the healing section was their favorite, which I wasn't expecting, but it's also really good because yes, you're right, you know, and for me, those were also the toughest stories to write. Yeah.
And thank you for just like disclosing in that first part of the healing about your own experiences of child sexual abuse. That must have been like a lot to do. And so, yeah, just thank you for that. And Debbie has her hand up. Debbie, you've got on mute. And Debbie, she's woken up at 5 a.m. she's in Australia and she's and she's committed. So
starting half an hour later today was quite the luxury.
Yeah, so serious.
Yeah, no, the thing I would ask about, you've already a little bit mentioned it, is this idea of having the language to not just to talk about sex, but what interests me, and I found it in the book, is that when people grew up in either cultures or religions where it was very taboo to talk about not just about sex, but about being queer or about, you know, any of those things, that sometimes they didn't have the language to understand their own identity, their own feelings. And it's only when they get the language that they can do that. And was that, you're nodding, like, did you find that, like, with, did a lot of people seem to have that experience, like you need to talk about things to have the language to even understand yourself?
I'm nodding because what you were saying resonates with me. I feel like there's no way you can speak to an experience if somehow you don't have the words for it, right? And sometimes you don't have the words for it because you just don't know that it's a possibility, right? You might feel whatever you're feeling on the inside, but I think sometimes until, yes, you get the language, until your frame of understanding shifts, until you come into some new awareness, you know, without being able to articulate who you are, I think sometimes it's hard to be who you are, who you truly are. I don't think this is something I was conscious of as I was writing the book, but I feel like it's something that I guess I'm conscious of now. Yeah. And I think for me, this is where labels are helpful, right? Because it helps people recognize themselves. It also helps people find community. It also helps people find resources and knowledge, you know, which I think for me is the importance of being able to label yourself as whatever you are, whether you are asexual, whether you're polyamorous, whether you're celibate, you know, I think it allows you access into a world, and then you can learn more. And then you might find out, actually, this is not who I am. But then I also think that's the beautiful thing about identity. Whatever your identity is, it doesn't have to be fixed. That's something I firmly believe, right? That who you are today doesn't have to be who you are in 5 years or 10 years, because we grow, we change. And, you know, I think that's the beauty of life.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Becky, sorry. Becky.
Oh, no. Thanks.
Go for it, babes. Go through.
Cool. Yeah, so also really loved the book. I was wondering, how did you decide on the 3 sections, you know, like discovery, freedom, and healing? And, you know, does that map to what you see as kind of women's progress into kind of self-actualization of like their sensuality and sexuality?
It's a great question. So once I'd done about like 20 interviews. I did like a really kind of nerdish thing of putting everybody's name and age and country into a spreadsheet, right? And then I had this little column where I would write down the words that for me would come to my mind when I thought of their story. Because what I was looking for was a thread. I was like, okay, what do people have in common here? Is there anything that's like, you know, weaving its way through? And then it felt to me like there were three main things, right? I felt like there were lots of people who were questioning what they'd been told growing up and were trying to find a different path. And they didn't necessarily always know where they were going, but they were like, no, that doesn't work. I want to try something else, right? And so it felt to me like those people were on a journey, which is why I had a section called self-discovery. And then there were some people who I felt, wow, this is heavy. Those stuff that they have to work through, or the stuff that they are actually working through already, right? They are on some sort of healing journey. So for me, healing was another strong theme. And then there were a couple of people who I was like, oh my goodness, I want to be you when I grew up. You've totally figured it out. How are you living this amazing life? You know, and I'm like, oh, this is freedom. This is what freedom looks like. So that's how I came up with those three themes. And I think how I think about, in a sense, those themes now is I feel like for the most part, most of us, you know, find ourselves on a sort of journey, trying to figure out who we are, trying to figure out how to be our best selves, you know, and part of the work that needs to be done during self-discovery is also the work of healing. And I feel like we all have different types of traumas that we need to heal from, right? And, you know, in a way, I think of freedom as both the goal, but it's not like a fixed place that like you're just going to like go down this long winding route and finally arrive at, and that's the end of it, right? I feel like in a way, freedom is in moments, it's part of the journey, it's something that we both aim for, and it's something that we find in like moments of time and we just need to amplify. And yeah. I feel like I'm being a bit rambly with my thoughts, but maybe you get me.
Yeah, I get it. And I guess what's really interesting, I guess it's not always linear either, because from what you said, like self-discovery and healing, it can be at the same time, and it's all about the journey.
Exactly, because I don't want people to think, oh, like we do this and we get to freedom. I don't think that's what it is, right? And I feel like what we may think of as freedom now may not be freedom in 20 years' time, right? It may be freedom for us right now, maybe freedom for us in a particular moment in our life. But then our own aspirations for ourselves might change, and then freedom might look different, right?
Yeah, that's thank you for that. And that last point is really, really interesting, because actually with freedom, with I guess some of the women that you talked to and they shared their stories of when they were a bit older, I guess what freedom looked like for them earlier in their lives is probably quite different to what it looks like now. And so I guess we don't know what the next 20 years would look like and what we consider freedom to be. Thank you.
Exactly.
Becky, how free do you feel about the concept of sex?
What with my very monogamous heteronormative relationship?
Right.
No, yeah. I do feel a lot of freedom in myself now. I think when I was younger, like a lot of people had mentioned, I guess had quite negative experiences where you don't really realize that something is meant to be good for you too, or you don't necessarily have your own agency. So I say that actually I feel like I've got more sexual agency now, even if I am kind of in this kind of monogamous relationship, than I did when I was younger and had what seemed to be freedom, but actually was not, because I was in this box of the patriarchy of sex in a heterosexual world that I'm in, and then didn't know it.
Thank you for sharing. Nana, do you feel free? Are you there? Are you living your best sexual life? Are you like a wig in the wind, just floating? Like, what's going on? Nana.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I feel like you were breaking a little bit for me. Am I breaking for you guys, or
No,
is it
not
just
at all? Not at all. Probably just me. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. So was that a question to me? Do I feel like a
Yes.
wig in the wind?
Yeah. With freedom, like sexually.
I definitely feel more free than I have ever been, you know, but then like I was saying, I also don't think, I think freedom is something that's constantly evolving. So I think what I can say is, for me, it's a practice and it's also a value, right? To also make sure that I stay true to my values. Staying true to my values is like an important part of freedom for me, you know? So just that awareness of it, you know, it's really key for me.
For sure. I mean, I know Rose wants to come in. I was gonna say I feel more free to use my voice. Like I've kicked a guy out of bed once because he wasn't gonna go down on me. I'm like, look, mate, the party ain't starting until you go down, and he didn't. So I was like, you need to find your Uber and bounce. So I said I used in my voice that I ever did. But anyway, Rose, your time.
Yeah, also really loved the book. I've got a couple of questions. So one of them follows on really from what Liz just said. So I've got twins and they're 3 as well. And it's just sort of, when I was reading the book, I was really interested in so, you know, women that were mothers and then how they were expressing them sexually. And mostly I was just surprised that they had that much energy to explore their own desires and seek it out. Just wondering what your own experience has been of becoming a mother, and has that changed the way you express yourself sexually, or the way you feel about sex? Because obviously when you become a parent, it's like it's like an all-consuming part of your identity. And it's so, actually reading the book was, I mean, to be honest with you, I really like sex, and I do still get a fair bit, to be honest. But
Oh,
reading,
lucky you.
I'm not showing. Well, when I say a fair bit, I mean once a week. But reading the book,
That's a fair bit.
it's all right, isn't it? It's not bad going. But
You're not doing too bad yet, though.
I think the book, you know, it was good for me. You know, it just sort of, I've almost, you know, in terms of my neural pathways in my brain, it just sort of like lit things up that hadn't been lit for a while. So I'm interested in your experience.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think for me, what was quite ironic, especially when the book came out, I feel like it's a bit better now. When the book came out, I was like, oh my goodness, I am having the least amount of sex that I have ever had in my life. And I have a book about sex to promote. Like the irony, it was just like, oh my goodness, you know? And also I'm a single mom, right? I'm not partnered, I'm not in a relationship. I can't go out like I used to. Like also recently, I've just moved to like outside of the capital. So I'm not even like as accessible as I used to be. But that's just the reality of my life now. And it's okay. It's not like terrible. I mean, I'm actually thrilled because literally in the past like 2 weeks, I seem to have finally cracked the sleep training, and now my daughter is sleeping through the night. So I feel like possibilities are now opening up that weren't there before. Yeah, I'm definitely not having like the fun times I was having in my 30s. You know?
Unfortunately, no, I hear you.
Nana, you still look like you're in your 30s.
Oh,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah. I was just thinking, you know, you bothered to put nice earrings on, and you look beautiful, and your hair looks beautiful. And I'm in my dressing gown, so
I'm in my
you've
90s.
inspired
I just
me.
I put the earrings on to trick you guys.
That's white. That's white privilege. You're out here in your dressing gown, getting more sex than Nana.
Exactly.
Oh my god, where's equality when we need it?
I agree. No, the other question was, how faithful were you in your rewriting of the women's interviews? Did you sort of, because I noticed you do keep some of their language, like the sort of vocabulary that they use. That's what sort of makes it, you know, you can relate to them. But did you have to sort of change it a lot?
No, I didn't. I mean, what I did was structured the story in a way that I thought would be interesting. So I didn't sort of tell the story back exactly how it was told to me, right? I'll think of, oh, how can I start this in an interesting way? What do I include? What do I leave out? But everything is the truth. I obviously changed like names of usually like other people. And obviously if the person wanted to be anonymous, I changed their name, but everything else was the same. Actually, I feel like maybe like in retrospect, some people I should have changed more about who they were, because there's some people who are anonymous who like people guessed who they were, right? Luckily nobody's too upset about it, but I'm like, okay, maybe I should have, because I really wanted to be faithful and you know, keep the sense of who people were. Yeah, I didn't really change much in terms of, I just changed their names basically. And maybe amazing. You have a friend and you can guess, oh, this friend dated this person at some point in time and they traveled to Berlin. Oh, I think it's you. So I've had people go and ask people, is this you? I read this book and this really sounds like you. And they're like, yeah, it's me.
Oops.
Yes.
It's brilliant. I think it takes great skill to be able to do that. I just think it's it was just absolutely brilliant. And just in terms of sort of capturing those women's experiences and give, you know, it's such an empowering thing to be the reader and then to also have been the woman that's featured. So yeah, just absolutely amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I was going to say, Sab, I know you have your hand up, but I just really want to really quickly capture Kathy, because Kathy only comes once a year and it's her second time she's come this year. So this is a shock. Like, she must have really loved your book. So Sabby will come back to you, but Kathy, wow, 2 months consecutively.
Liz, is it every time I come that you're going to call me out for not coming for like 12 months in a row?
No, it's always a praise, because that means you must have loved the book. Finally, I've told
really,
you that you want to show up for. Like, wow.
I really, really loved it. And I thought this was going to be next week because I didn't realise that February ends on Tuesday next week. And so it was like Saturday and I was like, I haven't read the book, but I really want to go to the book club. And then I started the book and then I finished it in like a day and a half because it was so good and so compelling. And I just really loved, like, every single story was just like captured my attention. There was no moment where I was like, oh, I've still got 200 pages left. It was like, I want this to go on forever. I want to read all these people's stories, and they're all so well written. And so like lots of them are only like 2 or 3 pages long, and they just capture someone's like entire sexual experience, and you get such a sense of them and their life and their loved ones and what's happened to them. I just thought it was really beautifully written, and yeah, thank you so much for writing it.
Thank you.
And
thank you so much for saying that. Hard woman.
Honestly, to get her here, boy, you must have wrote a work of art. But, you know, notwithstanding, equally, we love you, Sabby. Sabby comes every month, even when I've given her books that weren't great, but I know this isn't a month of that. And Sabby's not feeling too well, but she still turned up. Thank you. Here's your time. Like, Sab, go for it.
Yeah, no, hi, apologies for a slightly raspy voice. I've got a bit of a cold. But yeah, similarly to Kathy, I was shocked by how quickly February was coming to a close, but in some ways grateful for this cold, because on my day off when I was not properly functioning, I read this book and you know what, similarly to Kathy, it was just so compelling. And it is something, you know, we've spoken about, you know, before, and obviously when you've been on the call, is there's so much stigma and taboo around talking about your intimate sexual journeys and sexuality and, you know, your experiences, both traumatic but also joyful, that you just simply don't have. Like, you may not even ever be as candid and as open with the people you're most close to in your life. And actually, one thing I'm going to take away from this book is I want more conversations like that. I want to carve out more space and more time with the people who would also be interested in sharing that with me in my life. You know, having more frank conversation with my partner, using some of the language, you know, your book has empowered me with. So I just think it's incredible.
Sabby, you said you're going to use more of the language and maybe some of the sexual positions, maybe whips and
some
chains.
of it, more kinky stuff. Who knows? But I think, but no, I do genuinely think it's such an empowering piece of literature and art that you've created, and thank you so much for bringing it to us. One thing that I did have as a question was, there were quite a few themes that cut across a lot of the stories, and I know that you've also been speaking to women for many years now through your blog, and I just wondered whether there were particular themes that you saw coming up time and again that perhaps you resonated with you, or that you found interesting, that you could share with us, just from having had so many of these rich and interesting and profound conversations.
Yes. Gosh, there were so many. So beyond like the sort of broad themes that I spoke about, I think the thing that kind of like shocked me was how many people had experienced child sexual abuse. You know, that wasn't something I sort of expected when I was going into this project. And it got to a time, but then I also realized there was a question I was asking people, which was almost triggering people to tell me about the experiences of child sexual abuse. So at some point in time, I stopped asking that question. So it's entirely possible that there are other people who are in the book who had experienced child sexual abuse, but did not speak to it, right? Because the question I used to ask was, tell me about your earliest sexual memory. And for a lot of people, that was something, you know, that happened in childhood and was quite traumatic. Yeah, I think the other thing that came up to me as a theme, and not maybe a really strong theme, but one that I quite liked, was the connection between food and sex. You know, it came out more strongly in stories like Alexa's story about like, oh, this is something really interesting that would be fun to explore a lot more about. In a sense, the love of food, the love of sex, like there's a connection there somewhere, right? Obviously, sex and spirituality was also a strong theme. And I feel like for people who, in a sense, looked at life through a spiritual lens, sex was also an important part of that spirituality. Whereas for people who were religious, you know, sex was something that had been presented as bad and, you know, something you don't do or something that's, you know, if you did, there were going to be negative consequences. So that was also interesting. There was a dichotomy between, you know, religion and spirituality. The other thing that was also really interesting to me, which I hadn't expected, is the women who I interviewed who were of the Islamic faith. It felt like there was actually more, in a sense, space for sexuality from the Islamic faith, more than the Christian faith, you know? So that was also something else I observed. Yeah,
I really enjoyed that with like Salma's story as well, because you almost like got to peek behind what happens in these Islamic relationships. I'm mindful of the time. I hope you don't mind saving another 5 or 10 minutes. I know you got a life. Is that okay?
Yes,
Nana?
of course, it's fine.
Thank you.
Yes,
And it's so interesting you talk about food, because last August we actually had Francesca from Butter Honey Pig Bread. She actually came to our book club as well.
Oh,
I know you did an interview with her, a conversation. Yeah, so we love that, like intersectional food and it being a love language, like the one with I forgot the name of the story in New Orleans, and the 70-year-old woman that was in a lesbian relationship.
Alexis.
Yes, thank you. But as you hope you noticed, Nana, we've actually got a man in the room. I know we've been cussing him out, but there's actually a man in the room, Miguel. Miguel, this is your moment.
Hi, Nana. Like I love the book. I think it's great. It gives you a perspective that Nana brings, which is not new, but it's really in your face to me. So it was. Am I breaking up a bit?
Yeah, for me. But I'm also thinking maybe I'm going to move to another side of my room just to see if I can get a better connection, because I think my connection is maybe not the best as well.
I think he's breaking up for everyone.
Yeah, he's breaking up for everyone.
All right.
So yeah, like the book was quite incredible. I was saying before you join in, at least for me, it started to be quite heavy halfway through the book. The first like stories are quite kind of like uplifting and interesting and kind of like showing like different ways of approaching sex and sexuality and stuff without not the dark part of the experiences. But I have, I think, a couple of questions. I'm gonna try to phrase the questions the best way possible. So with regards to the healing process, right? And the healing process of women, it's I wanted to ask you, like during the interviews, I'm sure there was some really kind of like tough times. And how did you kind of approach the situation? How can you kind of like turn it around and continue the interview? or if there was some situation or some story that you didn't put in the book because somehow it started to be really bad or really dark. And the second question is, because Liz is forcing me to read more about Black culture, Black stuff. And I come across like...
I'm not forcing you, but you've realized that your very white and male perspective has no source, and it's good that
you're highlighting my ignorance, so to speak,
yes,
right?
Yes.
Highlighting my ignorance. And basically, I came across a couple of books where they talk about the African cultures before colonization and how they approached sexuality in a way more fluid approach, so to speak. And how do you feel that as an African woman, turning or rediscovering that part of your cultures might be the positive way to go forward for Africa, so to speak? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And it's almost like, you know, what my second book is about. But then part of what I am looking at in my second book is indigenous African ways in which knowledge around sex and sexuality was passed, and how we can reclaim some of those, even if those were, you know, patriarchal, to serve our own interests today. So this is part of what I am currently researching and thinking about, and have to deliver to my publisher sometime next year. So yes,
so I'll read the book then.
Yes, but I think that's it, right? Like, there's a power in going back to reclaim things that are good from your past, right? And pre-colonization, and obviously none of us existed then, but like from culture, from oral history, from rituals that still exist today, you realize that sexuality was thought of in more fluid ways. There were avenues for passing on knowledge around sex and sexuality. A lot of it was patriarchal. It was designed to, you know, ensure that as a woman, as a wife, you pleased your husband. But then, like everything else, you know, and not even everything else, some of the practices were just even like revolutionary and also focused on women's pleasure. And a lot of that were stopped by missionaries, you know, who said, this is evil. It's, you know, as a good Christian woman, you don't do that. And yeah, a lot of those rituals have died out or just really become something that the majority of people don't practice, you know? And I think it's worthwhile looking at some of these practices and thinking, how do we bring some of these back, you know, in ways that are empowering for women and young girls today? So yeah, that's part of what I'm researching now. And then in terms of how I dealt with, you know, people telling me really difficult stories and how would I deal if somebody had a breakdown, were different ways in which I dealt with that. A lot of the times when people told me about traumatic experiences they've had, you know, at the end, they would also tell me this is the first time they've ever told this to somebody. So I was really deliberate and careful in how I held space for people. A lot of the conversations were held in private spaces. Some people I interviewed at home, some people I interviewed in their homes. Obviously, some conversations were over Zoom. There was a time when somebody else interviewed, and I can say who she is because she's open in the book, Phylista. She's the one that someone mentioned earlier. She's a sex worker. She also lives positively. And, you know, she had a breakdown during the conversation and we stopped and resumed in about 10 minutes. So it was really dependent on what the person needed at that point in time. But there wasn't anything I left out of the book because it was too hard. No, nobody demanded.
Thank you so much for that, Nana. Again, I'm mindful of the time for yourself, Nana, and your energy levels, and we really appreciate you being here. Just want to give anyone a final chance who hasn't asked a question, who would like to. Judy Ann, like, you know, you're normally doing stuff and you're here. Nana's here.
Thank you. Hello, Nana. Thank you so much for coming along today, and thank you so much for writing this book. I've really enjoyed it. I don't think I've specifically got a question, but just wanted to acknowledge that I found it made me, I felt uplifted reading the book, and there was so much in the book. We touched upon, you know, as I said earlier, before you joined us earlier this evening, it sort of touched upon all the emotions. You talked about the beauty of life earlier on, and for me, that's what your book is. That's, you know, at the moment, I'm feeling really a bit crap about everything generally in the world, as I'm sure many of us are. And yet your book has sort of grounded me again and made me think, you know, this is what is important in life. This is what it's all about: relationships, sex, you know, whatever, you know, all these different things and these emotions and things. And it's also made me reflect back on my past and relationships that I've had, with renewed vision. And as a mother, I have 3 children. They're teenagers now. Well, actually, no, my eldest is now 20. It's scary. It's scary, you know, thinking about them and how to, you know, what's the word? Their journeys that are ahead of them. But it's sort of, sorry, I'm rambling. But anyway, I just found it, you know, really, really empowering book. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that.
I'm going to give Debbie the last word, unless anybody else wanted to interject before Debbie. Jane, you good? You got your bits in?
Yeah, I'm just going to leave a comment to say how much I love the cover, Nana, and I love the artwork on it. It looks really cool.
Thank you so much.
Debbie, you have the final word.
Well, and honestly, this is not a question. It's just I wanted to say thank you so much. The book is valuable. Like, I think it was important that it be written, and can't wait to read the next one.
Oh, thank you so much. I have to say, book club discussions are the best because you guys are always so like appreciative, and it's really nice to come and feel all of the love. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for taking the time out, and you know, I hope your child has a beautiful 4th birthday as it's coming up. 3rd birthday, sorry, I'm not trying to age. And also as well, I hope you get more, I hope you, even though you live outside of the main hub of Accra, I hope you get some good sex soon, you know, some good.
I know, right?
Definitely. Like, yeah, I'm sure you will. You're still doing that, but I'm sure will present themselves, and we're looking forward. I'm going to be begging you again to come back once the next book hits the publishing machine. Like, we're looking forward to that.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the support.
Great, our picture, Liz.
Oh my God, sorry, can we have a selfie with you? Oh my God, thank you, guys. You got to help me out. I'm just so enthralled with her. We have like a photo. Is that okay? I might post it on Insta. Will you be
happy? No worries. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, everyone has got their book on see, and you can see all the different like versions of the book as well. Ready? Let me get the light. Let me get the light. Okay, everyone ready to rock and roll? Miguel, man, don't be a man like
Miguel's scrolling. He's scrolling.
Why have I got a different cover?
I'm trying to get the cover.
I had it ready. I was ready.
It's like a man trying to find the clitoris, isn't it? Just take fumbling about, like fumbling about. Come on, man. We're getting dry out here. Hurry up.
I got it.
Liz, you're too much. We're getting dry.
The filter doesn't get it.
Unblur your background. Go on video and unblur your background.
Bring it closer. Okay, yeah.
Come a bit closer.
Forget what's behind.
No, don't worry, babe. At least you know you'll actually clean your clothes. That's great. On the count of 3, 2, 1, smile. Got the photo. Thank you so much, Nana.
Thank you.
Have a good
Instagram.
Thank you.
All right, take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.